Do you have an interest in local history? Enjoy interviewing and have some time to volunteer? Then talk to us about getting involved with our Heritage Project. We're bringing history alive on your local radio station. Call Gravity FM for more details on 01476 573300.
Well, I'm in Hough on the Hill today, except it's pronounced Hough. You did correct me once, it's Hough on the Hill. And I'm talking to Henry Lord, who is an archivist and treasurer of the Parish of Hough on the Hill History Society. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the society and what you do, what you have done and what you're going to do?
Well, I can give you a brief history. We started in 1984 when a group of people got together to record local history and bring it into reality. We started mainly collecting things. There's a lot of information to collect, a lot of materials that we had already got and photographs. We did a course on local history with Nigel Kerr from University of Nottingham, and we did actually record a piece for Radio Nottingham some time ago, because we've got some Roman remains on the farm, on one of our farms, so he took us down there, and then we had a bit of a talk outside the pub, and that was quite interesting. And gradually the archives have grown, and we're a focus for material. People bring us anything that's relevant to Hough on the Hill, and I sort of keep it and try and make something of it. We do a lot of visits, mystery tours, displays and talks, some from our own research and some by members who have got a tale to tell, I suppose. And then we have people come and give talks in the evenings as well. We have visits in the summer to various places that are not normally open to the public. We get a group together and it enables us to go to visit houses that are not normally open. So
this is living history, isn't it? Would you call it living history? You just preserving everybody's...
Well, both. We've over 1,000 photographs of Hough. Some are copies that have lent, and we've copied them and then sent them back. And we've got one or two on glass that were very early photographs of a windmill we used to have that's now gone. The church before the clock was put in, and all sorts of things like that.
When was there a windmill?
The windmill, it was last used about 1918, I'm told. We've got one or two photographs of it being demolished and falling into decay. I would say it'd be put in the middle of the 18th century, I would imagine, when a lot of windmills were put up there. It was a post mill.
How do you keep track of everything, all these photographs?
The photographs, we give them all a number. In the early days we found somebody in Newark who was from Brandon, which is part of Hough, who was able to copy the photographs and enlarge them, but it was quite primitive, and a lot of them have sort of faded since then, but modern scanning and everything, you can copy photographs quite easily. So we've got a lot of news cuttings. We try and keep as many news cuttings of Hough as we can, and anybody that's sort of associated with Hough. We keep as many property sales brochures as we can. Started at about 1990 something, so it's surprising how different house prices are now to even then.
I should think they've gone up a little bit, haven't they?
Just a little bit, yes. I mean, you go back to the 70s, houses were selling for about £3,000, and now there'll be £200,000 or £300,000 in that quite a short time, really.
And I've got to ask you this. Tell me about the Romans. What did the Romans ever do for Hough?
What did they do for Hough? I wouldn't like to say, really, but there's several settlements in the fields where we could find the Roman pottery. We keep picking pottery up, and you could tell the soil's a different colour. It's all sort of black where the farmsteads have been. And of course we're not far from the Ermine Street, so there will be a certain development there. Did
they live round here, or did they just camp out?
I would say a bit of both. There'll be farmsteads. They must have been there a long time because of the pottery, and the structure of the soil's changed. It's where it would have been in just ordinary clay. You could see all these sort of an acre of dark ground where all the manure's gone and such like. We've got some evidence of Iron Age round houses. When they put the pipeline through from Silt Willoughby to Staithorpe, archaeological digs and processing, they found quite a few of these round houses, and they were all recorded and such like. There was a Saxon house remains they found, and some prehistoric post holes which they thought was about 2000 BC. That was just where the pipeline went. And then just over the parish into Normanton there were a lot of Roman remains there.
Prehistoric post holes?
A line of prehistoric post holes. They could see these holes that were in a line dug into the through the ironstone.
And that's 4,000 years ago. Absolutely amazing.
That was all in the same area, really.
Have you got a school in Hough?
Yes, there was a... Do you want to talk about the school?
Well, I just wondered if they learn all about this.
No, this
is just what
the school closed in 1984. It opened in 1868. The schoolhouse and the school itself are sort of an L-shaped building, which was built by Lord Brownlow. It's a lovely Gothic building, which is now closed in 84. The retired teacher lived there until she died, and then it was sold on, so it's now a private house. But
it's still there.
The school building's still there.
Yes.
And at one time, I was looking in the registers, and there were about turn of the last century, 1900. There were about 120 pupils at Hough School, and they were coming from as far away as Drydoddington and Caythorpe and all round there. Quite a lot came from Caythorpe, but I think Caythorpe built their own school, and then that stopped. In its final days, there were about a dozen pupils. And of course, then the school buildings were used as a village hall until the teacher died, and then, of course, it became empty and we had to move out. So we no longer got a village hall as such.
So where do you meet then as a society?
Well, we used to meet at my house, but we now meet at Carlton Scroot Village Hall, which is it's quite good because we support anything that helps their village hall, keeps it going. You know. So and we meet there once a month. I think it's the third Tuesday in the month, and we have a meeting. Christmas meeting is usually social, where we sort of have a light-hearted look at antiques and on wine or anything else that takes a fancy. February we have a dinner. January, March, April we have meetings, and then in the spring and summer we go on try to go on visits. We probably go around a village or go to some house like Staunton Hall or something like that, and then we get shown around, because they're not normally open to the public. Because somewhere like Gainsborough Hall, although we go there, anybody can go there, so it's nice to go to places that are not normally open. I mean, because we've been going since 1984, and the membership has changed quite a bit. You know, we are starting to go around places we've been to before, because there's only a few of us that probably been to them, and so that's a bit of an advantage, because it does get harder to find places to go. We do try and get someone to take us around a village in the summer. Pick a village and
a local village, or do you travel?
No, we try and get a local village, and might be Fullbeck or Leadenham or Brantbroughton. We've been round, and then we get somebody who'll take us round. So it's always a good evening.
And do they all have a history society?
No.
So you're a bit unique.
No, I think they've got one. They've got one at Allington. I mean, a few villages have them, but as far as I'm concerned, they're vital, because it's a focus for stuff to come to us. I mean, somebody gave me a truncheon, Constable of Hough, 1836, with William the Third or Fourth, I can't remember, written on it. Well, that wouldn't have come to us, and we put it in our archives. That wouldn't have come to us if we hadn't got a history society. No? Somebody gave me a painting of the windmill.
A painting?
A painting of the windmill.
That's quite old then, isn't it, the painting?
Yes.
If it's been gone that long, it's...
Yes, but the person who gave it to me, his husband was a builder, and he found it in a dustbin or something, and he said, "Oh, I'll take this home." He asked the person if he could take it home, and anyway, it finished up in somebody's house. I asked if I could take a photograph of it. I photographed it just for the History Society, and then when she moved away, she passed it on to me. There's things like that. That's where they're invaluable. And then we do a bit of work ourselves. We've transcribed all the parish register, the church register from about 1580 up to 1999. So all the births, marriages and deaths are all on there. And because we've got them on the computer, we can sort all them into name order. So if anybody writes to me or emails me about a family, want to know more about a family, I can just print off all their name, that particular name, and send it off to them. So, and I'll do that quite a lot regularly. And of course I visit the church, and it's got my contact in the church. So we've done all the censuses 1841 to 1911. We've got all the names on the census, and that's all done on a database. So we've got every name and everything for 70 years on that. So there's quite a lot of information there.
What do you know about the really very early history of Hough on the Hill? I mean, did you have a lord? Was it an estate? Not. I know you're a lord. Well, that's interesting. I mean, did you have an ancestor here? You know, right at the beginning. Can you trace your family back?
We moved here in 1817.
1870. I had a suspicion this might be the case.
But that was Lord Brownlow owned most of the village. He owned most of the village, and then we moved here from Belton. So we're probably, although we're tenant farmers, we were tenants probably on another farm on his estate somewhere, which is Belton and London Thorpe and so around there.
So he had quite a massive estate.
Oh, he had a massive estate, yes. Massive estate. I mean, there's not so much left now, but we've got some ancestors that live in Pinchbeck area, but I can't join that branch up to ourselves. There's a gap. I can go back to 1722, and then this Pinchbeck family goes up to about 1680, but I can't join the two together. I asked Lord Brownlow's agent about whether there was any connection with Brownlow's at Pinchbeck, and he said, oh, that was their ancestral home before they built Belton. It all fitted in, really. So
if you can just get that little link, you
can
go back another 100 years or so.
Yeah, so it's still working on it. That's on a personal basis.
How did Hough on the Hill come to thrive? Was it farming mainly?
The church is over 1,000 years old. There's ironstone just down the road, so that's an attraction in itself. There's a pure water supply in the village 365 days of the year. There's a spring just out where you park your car, and
no, it's still there.
And that's just pure water, and that was still in use until about 1950 something, when they put the mains in. So that's where people got the water supply from that well. Well, there's two wells like that. There's two springs like that, and then there's various wells around the village as well. Pure drinking water. So I mean, if you got water, you're halfway to getting a good settlement, aren't you?
And something to sell if you've got the ironstone.
Yeah. We know there were three halls. There was a high hall, a low hall, and the manor house. They were both occupied by Thorolds, who were the principal family in the area. That was pre-Civil War. Of course, they suffered in the Civil War, being Royalists and Roman Catholics.
So what was the predominant following in Hough? Were we Roundheads here, or were we Cavaliers?
There would probably be more parliamentarians, I would have thought. Although Newark was a Royalist stronghold.
It was.
So, well, Thorolds would be Royalists, so
they would, yes.
So they would be pro-Royalist, but I don't think there was anything particularly strong about it all. I think they tried to keep a low profile, but, from what I've read. But,
well, if you took it too seriously, it split families, didn't it? That's probably very sensible. So there were three halls, two with Thorolds in. Yeah,
so the manor house in the 1700s, that would belong to the Payne family. Ethelreda Payne married Sir John Cust, who was a Speaker of the House of Commons in 1743. So all her dowry was the land at Hough. She married Sir John Cust, who was part of the Brownlows family. That's how Brownlows came to own Hough, I suppose.
I understood that she actually married beneath her, according to the Payne family.
That's what I've read in the Brownlow family book. You've read that, yes.
So the Paynes must have thought they were really quite something.
Yeah, I think so, yes, yeah.
So what's their background? Were they just landowners?
I don't know much about the Payne family. I've been trying to find out, but I can't find out much about them. But they were quite friendly with William of Orange, I think. So there's some connection there, because there's a monument in the church mentioning William of Orange on their tombstone thing. Edward Payne, but they had quite a lot of children and family die quite young, and there was two girls that were the heiresses of all of the estate and property, and one was Ethelreda Payne. I can't remember the name of the other one. Of course, she married this John Cust, and that's how Brownlows came to be in the parish. I think the halls were still here then, but there's just half of the manor house left.
Do they still own all the farms?
No. When previous Lord Brownlow died, the estate was sold.
So you all bought your own farms?
No, it was all bought. Well, we put a bid in for it, but it was sold to general accident. Lord Brownlow's son kept one farm for himself, which is still here. But, but the majority of it got sold to General Accident, so which became Norwich Union. And then it was offered to us for sale. Our part, anyway, was offered to sale, so we bought it about 2005 between us. The family bought it, anyway.
That is amazing. If you've had links with the land right the way back to 1700s, 1600s, and then you get your chance to actually own it, I think that's fabulous.
Yes.
I'm in Hough on the Hill and I'm talking to John Lord, who's a semi-retired farmer with a great passion for wood. He's showing me some photographs actually. This is a fascinating album. It's all about the church gate. So what got you started on this, John?
Well, I've always wanted to do something in green wood. And working oak in green is different to working it when it's dry, because it moves so. In many ways it's a lot easier to work, but it has its problems. It splits and twists and that sort of thing. So that was always a challenge. Well, on the farm I'd got plenty of oak, so I thought, well, let's get started. So I cut some trees down and took it to a woodman that cuts trees up in Honeypot Lane, gave him a design and he cut it up. See on these pictures where it was. It took me about 2 years, I suppose. I can't remember how many hours it took me because I've got it all written down, but I've not added it up yet. But a lot of the time was spent making things, the trestles and the pegs for pegging it to, and a lot of things to make things really, which once it's done, they're redundant. But anyway, it all finished up all right, and everyone seemed to be quite happy with it.
It's very beautiful.
And then we put shingles on the top, which come from British Columbia in Canada. They're supposed to last 100 years. Now, whether they will or what, no one's really tested them out.
And did you design this with the arches?
It's really traditional design of a lich gate. The lich gate really is the history of a lich gate is when there's a funeral, they put the coffin under the lich gate out of the weather as they're taking it up to the church. Take the lid off because they all had to be wrapped in wool at one time, and the people that were responsible for the funeral saw that it was the right person inside. But of course, where this lich gate is, no way will they carry a coffin in it because it's at the bottom of some steps and up a real steep hill. But anyway, it seems to be in keeping with the surroundings.
Was there ever a lich gate there before, as far as you know?
No. It was just an iron gate.
And when did you do this? When did you start it?
Well, I started this cutting the trees down about it'd be 3 years ago, and then I finished it last September 2011. It all went very well really. We had a bit of a problem with the stone footings. It was that year when the weather was very frosty. They were doing them in the winter time and we just had to stop till the springtime. Several comments about the gates themselves, the gates at the top end of it, because I've left a gap so you can walk through without opening the gates. And people say, oh, John made the gates too short, but it didn't really. And I picked that up at a funeral when I was at Musson. They were a similar setup to that, and that's where I picked that up. So, and the dedication was by Alan Robson, who was agricultural chaplain for Lincolnshire, and it was dedicated at our Harvest Festival on the 2nd of October 2011. So it's been up just over a year now.
The shingles, they're weathering, and it looks lovely now.
Yeah. Carved inside, there are some sayings.
Yes, what are they all about then?
And mottos, although they're not really clear, and unless the light is quite right, you can't really read them. Perhaps I ought to have done a different type of writing, carving on that, but I'm going to try and paint some of them inside, and they might be a bit clearer. The one on the south side, it says, "We are all travellers of this world, and the best we can find in our travels is an honest friend." There's one on the inside which is, "Hands that help are holier than lips that pray."
So where did you get these sayings from?
Out of book, really.
Are they traditionally on a lich gate?
No, it's just to make it a bit more unique.
I have photographed all these sayings, and you can read them.
Can you?
Yes,
You photographed them?
I did, yes.
Oh, but they're really good sayings, yeah. One is by Winston Churchill. Now, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
That's nice.
That's Winston Churchill. Yeah.
What's going on here?
Well, I think we're just putting a one of the trusses up with the farm forklift. That's one of the side bits going up.
That's a serious piece of work.
But we just had to do it, put it up when I got a mate on the farm. I don't very often get mates when there's a bit of free time or something like that. It all finished up all right.
So how long have you lived in Hough?
Well, I was born in the churchyard, about 50 yards from the church, and then I moved to the other end of the village, about 500 yards, just at the crossroads here. And then about 6 years ago, I moved nearer the churchyard. So I don't know whether that's a bit ominous or not. I don't know.
You've obviously got a great affinity for this church.
Yes, yeah.
That does look glorious.
It'll be here when I've gone, I hope, anyway.
Does it have any maintenance requirements?
No, shouldn't do. The only problem it might have is if a branch falls on it, and that's we'll have to see, won't we?
It's very lovely.
There's 2 mature trees either side of it, which might drop a branch sometime.
You've done lots of other things as well.
Well, in the church, yes, I've done a pulpit, chair for the vicar.
To be in the church?
Yes, because the church furniture was getting very tatty. They're just sort of things I want to do sometime.
Have you done all these carvings?
Yes.
And you're doing this as a volunteer?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're very talented.
A village sign which is put up near the Lich Gate now.
Yes.
I don't know whether you've seen that.
I've seen
now.
that, yes. You did that too, did you?
And there's the windmill. I don't know if you can see that there. Can you see the windmill?
Yes, I can.
The windmill.
So did you draw that first?
You draw it out, yeah. And there's a pulpit and altar rail I've done as well.
Are they all out as well?
They're all out, yeah. I have a shed at the back of my house there, and we have a carving group come here every Saturday. The 10 of us come all Saturdays, not in the summertime but in the winter time. So you have to do a bit of carving to keep up with them, like. So we've been doing that for about 20 years, I suppose, yeah.
So these are things that the group
have done, yes. Yeah. We're not a club, we call ourselves a group.
So are these just for personal pleasure, or do they sell them?
Yes, just for personal pleasure. Odd things get sold, but mostly they're just done for pleasure.
I think you could do a Noah's Ark next for the church.
Well, one of the group is thinking of doing a Noah's Ark, but he's started something else at the minute.
And what's this?
It's a lid off a pot, and it's always been in the house as long as I can remember, so I must be 75 years old. And then I found a photograph of it down in a knick-knack shop in Herefordshire. So I thought, oh, it's a nice picture, so I carved it, you see.
And what's that say there?
With my proper eye will I see to it. But I've since found out that it's the original painting is in a house in East Yorkshire, but which I would want to go and see. But it must have been quite a famous painting, or to have that done, and then a photograph done of it.
And it says Uncle Toby.
Uncle Toby, yeah.
Well, I wonder what it's about. It's worth researching that, isn't it?
Well, it's just this man looking in this lady's eye, you see, that's what it is. It's on a house in northeast of York.
Just going back to all the things you've done for the church, do you have a church warden?
There's only me at the minute.
You're the church warden as well?
Yes, yeah.
And the bells? What about the bells?
Well,
do you ring those as well?
No. My brother, he knows more about the bells, although I know they were rehung in about 1910 because it's got my uncle's name written on it, another church warden, Mr. Cragg, on the bell frame. So they're 100 years old, so it was rehung out. They're in reasonable order, the bells are. They do get rung on special occasions sometimes, for if there's a wedding there, and we're hoping to ring them because the Bishop of Lincoln's coming to Hough Church for service, so hopefully we'll ring them then.
So would you say the church is the heart of the village?
Oh, I think so, yes. Although we don't get too many people there on Sundays, but they'd miss if it wasn't there.
You've just got one pub in the
village?
One
pub, yeah. Well, it's very popular, yeah.
And
if the church was as popular as a pub, I wouldn't worry. Because they come from miles around to the pub.
So lots of local events and things going on.
Yes. But at the back of the church, we've had a few pews taken out, so we can use it for other events now, which have had meetings there. It's not quite so formal as sitting in pews.
What are you going to do with the pews?
Some of them weren't very good. They were sold out. They'd passed the sell-by date.
And they haven't asked you to carve any more yet, then?
No. They have one or two functions at they've cleared a space, because before The whole church was pews. We had nowhere to stand at all if you wanted a cup of coffee at the end of the service like we used to.
And do you have a vicar, a rector?
There's a vicar, yeah, but he's got 14 other churches to look at. 14. So, and then there's one or two who's got one or two helpers. There's a duty of care vicar as well. Well, it's a part-time vicar, and then there's several lay readers in the parish. So the vicar we've got, who's in charge of everything, he's from Ancaster.
So every Sunday you either have the vicar or a lay preacher?
Yes, that's right. The lay readers.
A lay reader.
Lay readers.
How do you become a lay reader?
Well, I think I should say you have to go for some training and have the dedication, really. That's the long and short of it. And be able to talk as well.
Well, you're not doing bad.
That's the thing. But we're quite fortunate.
Are you a lay reader?
No. He taken a few sermons, but I didn't enjoy it. I don't have time to do it all the time. No.
Have you got any special windows in the church?
Yes, there's 3 by... I can't remember the man's name, but his symbol is a little sheaf, which is always in the bottom left-hand corner. He's quite a renowned glassman. In fact, only last week we've just had one window. It kept having a bit of vandalism, and we've just had it renewed and put in, and some screens put up at it. But that was a clear window.
Have you got an organ in the church?
Yes, yeah, and we're very fortunate having a local organist. She's smashing. Yeah.
Right. Who's that?
Zoe. She just moved into the village about 2 years ago, and she's jolly good.
And concerts? You have concerts in the church?
Yes, we had 4 last year, I believe, and I think there might be 2 or 3 booked up for next year. And we get a small 100. There's 1 or 2 people says, yeah, we'll put on a few refreshments and then sell the tickets and advertise it. And it goes quite well, actually. Get quite a variety of music. Some's a bit heavy sometimes, but you have to listen to that to say what you like and what you don't like.
And have you got any memorials in the village?
There's one particular one in the churchyard, quite a big gravestone. And it's got about 4 children that died within a few days of one another in about the turn of the century, 19 some odd. And I should say it could have been diphtheria, whooping cough, and that stone's as straight as a die it was put in. And a lot of others that have been put in recently are all tilting and bending over, but this one's dead straight. But there's no other than the one that my brother was talking about, the Payne family. That's quite an elaborate memorial, but unfortunately it's hidden at the back of the organ, which no one really sees.
It's quite an unusual shape, the church, with the round tower going up the side.
Yes, yeah.
Was that all built at the same time?
Oh no, there's only 3 like it in the country with those round towers. And there again, it's as straight as a die, and the one in Northampton's perhaps more famous, but it's not a patch on ours, I don't think. Ours is a lot bigger than it, and I've been up it dozens and dozens of times, and I can't tell you how many steps are in it. From the bells to the top, you go up some stairs which are very, very narrow, and that's in the church wall. The clock on the church was put in 1897, Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, I believe it was. It's been going reasonably well till this year, and we had problems with it, and we found out face on the north side has got very badly rusted, and it's rusted that much it's swelled and the hands won't go round. So we've disconnected the north side, but the south side's okay. Whether we get the north side repaired, I don't know. It's quite expensive. Well, anything to do with it.
Could you not carve a new one?
I think anything on the church seems expensive, but we're pretty fortunate. It's not in bad order, the church isn't really.
I'm talking to Tina Lee, who is an amateur historian. She's also the chair of the History Society. So hello Tina, thank you very much for coming to talk to us. You give talks on sort of different aspects of history, don't you?
Yes, I do. I give them to WIs and other local history groups, and also occasionally my history group are brave enough to invite me to give a talk to them, because I'm really interested mostly in the medieval period, but also the Victorian.
What first got you involved?
Well, I first really got involved through the History Society, which came into being in the mid-80s, and through that started to begin research into the beginnings of Hough on the Hill and the development in Hough on the Hill, along with other members. And the more I got interested, I really started to spread my net a bit and start to think about generally the history of the villages and the development of the towns. And so I got into an interest that way, and then started to research for my talks. And I've really, really enjoyed that. It's very stimulating.
And it was a visitor, wasn't it, that got the actual society started in the first place?
Yes, a visitor from the home counties actually came up to stay with a friend in Gelston, which is just outside. It's part of the parish of Hough on the Hill. And he was shown round the area, and he was very, very taken with Hough on the Hill, and started to do a bit of research of his own. And when he came up to stay with this friend, John Trigg, he used to do a bit more sort of probing around the village. And eventually he felt that the village had got such an interesting history that we ought to form a local history group. He had a meeting with a group of us in the church, and that's how we came about. And we've been meeting fairly regularly ever since.
It is a very fascinating church, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
It's got a Saxon tower.
Yes, it has. It's one of the, I think it's only one of 3 in the country to have existing the round Saxon tower on the outside. Yeah, the outside.
What sort of age are we talking about then?
It's probably 11th century. Oh no, it would go back, actually, it would have gone back with a much, much smaller building to the 900s. There would have been something on there, and we think that it might have been related to the Castle Mound. There was a Motte and Bailey in Hough on the Hill, and the church is really in the position at the end of that area, and they would always have had some kind of chapel, and we think that may have been the beginning, so it may have gone back before that.
So when you say there's a castle mound,
yes,
is that just from looking at the lie of the land, or do you actually know that was there?
It's looking at the lie of the land. It's been investigated and it has all the characteristics, but unfortunately for us it was no point digging it, because it would have been a wooden structure with a wooden
castle.
Stockade. No, a stockade. They're not castle. It's a bit misleading because everyone thinks of the Norman stone castles that developed later, but originally it would have been a fairly primitive stockade and a wooden structure. And so of course it's difficult. You can only tell by the lie of the land what it was, because it fits in with any other Norman development.
Tina, why was Hough on the Hill so important?
Well, it was an obvious place for a settlement going way back, and we do have, as well as the Anglo-Saxon burial ground at Lovedon Hill, which had Roman burials in it before that. But if you look at Hough on the Hill, its situation, it's on very elevated ground, which is good for defensive purposes. There would have been a track going to Newark, which was one of the few crossings of the River Trent. It would probably be a ford crossing of the River Trent. It's a kind of defensive position, and also it has natural springs everywhere. So you've got fresh water, you've also got the valley for agriculture. And of course once the settlement is established for those reasons remain, and so the village developed from that.
If you don't actually live in Hough on the Hill, why would you join the History Society? How far do you recruit?
Well, the History Society is open to anyone to join, but of course obviously it will be self-limiting with travel, people being prepared to travel. But we have, apart from our archival material, which Henry Lord has gathered over the years, which is of interest to people locally, we also have talks. We have regular talks from people on a variety of subjects related to history, and we also in the summer months go out on visits. And because we are a local history society, we do get entree into some very, very interesting old houses who may not be open to the public on a regular basis, but they will be prepared to take a specialist group around. So we have been able to go into some very interesting private houses as well. And it's a good social group. I think people would enjoy it. We have an annual dinner, and we also have a Christmas social, and we try to make it as friendly as possible.
And the school in the village, can you tell me a little bit about the school? Because that's quite interesting as well.
The school, if anyone is anywhere near Hough on the Hill, it's well worth a visit, not only to see the church, but to see the school building, because it's a beautiful, beautiful building. It's got a Dutch gable end. It was built in the 1860s, the early 1860s, and it was built by Lord Brownlow, who of course owned the village. He established the school before primary education became compulsory, and because of that we're fortunate enough to have been able to look through some of the old school journals, the day books, going right back to the inception of the school. It's recorded that children came to the school from a very wide area, some of them walking as much as 3 and 4 miles, and of course without the road system as it is now, they would have been probably coming across fields in all weathers. And the journals give a very, very interesting picture of life in Hough on the Hill and the surrounding area, because we can tell from the day books the number of times that children are not in school because they're engaged in field work. And also they are having days off for the various feasts, Plough Monday and things like that. In fact, the early headmaster was fairly outraged at the number of days that the children had off for traditional things, because I think he must have been a city gent and didn't realise that the rhythms of the country would continue whether there was a school day or not.
Now, I just heard you mention Plough Monday. What is Plough Monday?
Well, it was actually the traditional start of the English agricultural year. It was normally on the 6th of January, and this was a very significant date. This was instead of Boxing Day, when traditionally servants were given some kind of a gift. When I did research on the Hough School, it really sort of set me off to look at the history of education in this country. And the day books were quite revealing, because even though the master does not go into a lot of detail, you realise that some of the children, he points out, are in the same clothes, more or less winter and summer, and you can't understand this. And the other thing is, he finds it difficult to understand the number of times the children do not turn up at the school because they're working on the land at different times. He had to get used to the fact that the school closed down from July to September. He makes comments about children being away in February and March for bean dropping, their bird scaring. They're doing all kinds of things, and also, as I say, being away for what are regarded as traditional holidays in the countryside. Of course, the local farmers and landowners were not too pleased when the compulsory education came in, because, it was taking their hands away, literally taking field hands away. And there was an awful lot of debate about it in Parliament before it came in, and a lot of industrialists weren't happy either in the towns and the cities because of the factory systems. Some exclusions were brought in for some of the factories if they agreed that the children could have 1 or 2 hours schooling within the factory itself, and I doubt very much whether too much of that happened.
So I'm sitting in the Brownlow Arms at Hough on the Hill, and I'm talking to Fiona Bryan.
That's right.
What can you tell me about the history of this pub?
Blimey, it goes back quite a long time. But what I know is that it was originally an estate's house for Lord Brownlow, who lived at Boughton House. And in one part of the pub was the gamekeeper. This was his home. And in another part of the pub they had what they called then a tap room. And that would have been the local pub for all the workers and everybody to come and have a beer at the end of the day. And they'd been farming or doing or looking after the estate or whatever they did. And until 1977, when he died, that's what it was.
Who provided the beer?
It would have been, I'm sure, somebody on the estate that was just that would have been their job, I suppose.
So did they have to pay in the tap room? Was it like a proper pub?
Yeah, oh yes, it would have been.
Right.
I'm sure it was much cheaper than it is now.
But they would be all Lord Brownlow's workers?
Yes.
So he could keep tabs on who was drinking the most.
I'm sure he would have liked that. I bet he liked a beer himself, who knows?
Paul Willoughby, he's the landlord.
He is, yeah.
When did he take over the pub?
They bought it in 1979. It was his father and mother that were then the landlord and landlady. They'd been running pubs Peterborough way before that. Paul's dad came out of the army and started being a landlord, and then they came here when they were selling off the estate, and the pub kind of has stayed in the family since then.
What sort of a state was it in when they took it over?
It was a bit of a wreck. It was before my time, but from what I understand, yes, it was a bit of a wreck.
So you've totally renovated the place?
Yes, it has been. And in those days, there wasn't bed and breakfast. They would have been living upstairs, and the pub would have been going.
So at the time we're talking about it being sold,
yes,
that would have been the heart of the community at that time.
Oh, definitely. And there would have been a lot of the local villagers that had been here a long time who would have bought their estate cottages and things from the estates when they were sold off. They would have definitely still been coming in here when Les, Paul's father, was the landlord, keeping it very much like a traditional pub. There were dartboards, they had dominoes nights, the food was very typically chicken in a basket, and that's what people loved. And Les was quite a strict landlord, and you know, when time was called, that meant time, and you had to go drink up and off you went, or there'd be trouble.
You started renovations here. How did that affect how the pub was a part of the community? Because times change.
Of course, and I think during those years, times changed for pubs in general. It became much more fashionable to go out and have a nice meal. You know, chefs started becoming more important, if you like, to food, and a la carte dining started to come into effect. You got your very strange chicken a la oranges and all that sort of thing going on. But the menus going out for dinner definitely changed, and going to the pub began to change all over. And this particularly then, around that time, that's when Paul would have been taking over the business and bringing it up to a modern restaurant sort of thing.
So when did you put the restaurant?
That would have been in the 80s, 81.
So tell me what accolades you've won.
We're very lucky. We've been awarded AA 5 stars, which is fantastic, and that covers the whole spectrum of restaurant, pub, bed and breakfast, service, everything.
And you've got a rosette as well.
We have, yeah, and that's for our food. Our chef is fantastic, Oliver Snell, and the team that he works with, Rory Bealby and Lizzie Goodwin. she's our pudding chef. Yeah, they're a brilliant team. They love food themselves, and they love to be really inspired with the menu, and they're always changing it, and consequently they have been rewarded for it by giving us the rosette. You know, it's really important, and it kind of boosts everybody, and we all love giving out this fantastic food.
Well, not too many places get 5 stars.
No, they don't. They don't.
And you're also in the Michelin Guide?
We are the Michelin Guide. You have to be recommended into these things. You can't pay. Some advertising, some things like that, you can pay to be involved in those. But with this particularly, we have been recommended by customers, which is fantastic. And then what they do is they secretly visit you twice through different times of the year to assess and make a decision on whether you are worthy or not. And luckily we've been picked.
And you're also in the Good Food Guide. Is that a similar sort of...
It is, yeah. Again, you have to be recommended. You can't... and we never know if these secret eaters or, like, secret shoppers, aren't they?
Is that a job? Secret eater?
Yeah, there's a number of... And, of course, locally, we have magazines and papers and things that have... Like the Food Monster.
Oh, yeah.
And people like that. We have people that deliberately, that's their job. They go around to places, test the food, give you a review, and whether it's good or bad, you don't know they're coming, you don't know who they are.
Do you have any contact numbers so that I could apply for a job as a secret eater?
Would you like, secret eater?
Yes,
yeah,
I'd
love that. Sounds like a good job. Especially when the food's as nice as this, you know, definitely.
And you get 1 or 2 important guests, don't you, from time to time?
We have the odd 1 or 2, yeah. We've had a film star, Ewan McGregor. He was here. I was very annoyed not to be working that night. Cranwell brings a lot of things, and he was here particularly. His brother's a pilot at Cranwell, and he came for the night, had his dinner, very much enjoyed it. Jeff Capes, we've had him a few times, world's strongest man.
Well, he's local, isn't he?
He is local, yes. We have Rory Underwood. He's a ex-England rugby captain. He's, again, not too far away and has a number of friends locally, so they would come here quite often. They do come here quite often. Bob Wilson, the England goalkeeper from years back.
What about royalty? Have you had any royalty here?
We have. Years ago, we had Prince Faisal, who was the son of the King of Jordan, and he was again training at Cranwell and would be here regularly for his chicken in a basket and things, as it was in those days. And again, Prince Andrew, he was again at Cranwell and popped down and had some lunch and things. So yeah, it's been colourful. It can be colourful. We do have our village people and they do come quite regularly, but it isn't the same as it used to be. We're a restaurant now more than anything, and that has made it have a different atmosphere to what you would expect a local pub to be.
Didn't you have a write-up recently in the Telegraph, was it?
We did. That was very nice. A lady called Fiona Duncan, she came and stayed the night, brought a friend of hers, and then we had a most fantastic write-up in the Sunday Telegraph.
You did have a very unusual visitor, of the feathered kind.
We did, yes. This is a few years back now, but there's a lady in the village that has a lot of birds. She rescues all kinds of birds, and this particular time she had an ostrich. It had a poorly leg, I think, or something. Well, the leg was obviously feeling better because it escaped, ran up the road, had to be caught. It tried to get into the pub. Yes, one of the local papers took that story and ran with it a little bit, drew a cartoon with the ostrich having a beer at the bar, which was fabulous.
So you had a little bird sanctuary locally?
Yes, in the village there is a little bird sanctuary, yes.
And that, I think, is Molly Burkitt, isn't it?
It is, yes. She's a local historian, actually.
So what other catastrophes have you suffered?
This is an old building with a lot of creaks and groans, and we had a leak which became quite bad. We had some guests upstairs and they'd had a bath, had a very relaxing time, pulled the plug out, pulled out the whole pipe work, and the next thing, within minutes, the whole bath was through the ceiling, all over inside the bar. Oh, it was a nightmare. Funny now you look back at it, but yeah, at the time.
Did you catch any customers with that?
A few got drips on, yeah.
I bet they finished the beer though, didn't
they? Of course they did. It's very good beer, yeah.
Paul, you're the landlord. When was this place built?
Well, the tap room was built in 1680, and the actual gamekeeper's house, Lord Brownlow, was built in 1857.
So last Thursday, Fiona, where were you?
Oh, we had a bit of a black tie dinner. It was very nice. We were invited to the Lincolnshire Life magazine Select Food Awards. It was all to do with our customers. They were invited to write up little reviews about us, and we were then recommended to the Lincolnshire Life.
We were in the top 3 restaurants in Lincolnshire. You don't know until the evening where you come first, second or third. So we were lucky enough to come second, runners up, in the whole of Lincolnshire, which is good.
So where are we now, Fiona?
Right, coming through here, this would have been the tap room. So this is the part of the building that's the oldest, 1680s. They would have had the barrels, and the locals, the farm workers and the estate workers would have all come in here, having a drink, open fire roaring, getting over their gripes of the day.
This is an unusual wall.
Yes, obviously how they built things in those days. The bricks are all done in a funny cubes style, aren't they? And yeah, it's a nice feature wall. And I love to imagine everybody in here, you know, all those years ago. Probably straw on the floor, a few animals roaming around.
This is like the dining room of a manor house, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kept that feeling, and you can imagine the gamekeeper being in here years ago, sat in front of the fire, probably smoking his pipe and relaxing after his day.
I didn't realise that the gamekeeper had such good accommodation.
Oh, well, obviously.
It must have been a very important person.
It must have been, because this house, as a house, it would have been absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Fiona.
I'm with David Hibbett, and David is a co-director
That's right,
of the
yes.
Grantham Archaeology Group.
Yep, that's us.
And you were involved in an excavation at Hough on the Hill.
Oh yes. The excavations at Hough on the Hill were very interesting. I inherited these excavations in about 1994. The work had been done there from about 1993. And we were looking for Hough on the Hill Priory. There was a rumour in the documentary evidence and oral history that Hough had lost a priory. Bit careless, I know, but we were alerted to this site just south of the church, a nice green field covered in earthworks. So this seemed to be the logical place to start.
So can we have a little bit of history about this site and why it was necessary to do the excavation?
Well, it was down to the earthworks in the field. When we looked at the mapping, all the maps made references to Priest's Close, Hall Close, the old yard. Now, we know there was a priory at Hough on the Hill. It was founded in 1164, and it was an alien cell of the Abbey of Cherbourg, which we thought was quite interesting, and it was 400 acres for one prior. So it started in about 1164. We believe it fell into disuse about 1350, because the documentary evidence said there was this one chap left looking after 400 acres, and the building was falling into disrepair, the grounds weren't being maintained. And what's fascinating from an archaeological point of view, there's nothing left. There's just a few earthworks in this field. So in between 1992 and 1995, the late Garland Grills, who used to run the group, did a morphological survey and some geophysical work on the site, and what we found was a lot of buried building remains.
So where does something like this begin? How do you actually start an excavation?
Well, contrary to popular belief, as you see on telly, we just don't go in heavy-handed with a very big JCB and dig some big holes. Some units do. We have to be a bit more laid back about it. Once we've done the map regression and the geophysical survey, we would be looking for interesting targets, humps and bumps in the ground, maybe bits of stonework showing through. And in around 1995 we just started to peel back the turf and just start to scrape around these exposed walls where the animals had been. What we found then was the site was far more important than what we realised, and wherever we took turf off or wherever we turned or looked, there was building foundations. So what we did then is expand the surveying, and then we expanded the trenching to the point by 2003 we'd laid in 42 trenches.
How big are the trenches?
We've got two types of trench. We've got a test pit, which is normally 1 square metre or 2 square metres, the sort of things you can drop in your back garden. The other trenches tend to be anything from 2 metres long up to 20 or 30 metres long. Some recent work we did at Ancaster, one of our trenches was 35 metres long, but they're unusual. What we found at Hough, we tended to go for open area excavation, where we machined back a big area, maybe 20 or 30 square metres, so you can see the archaeology in the ground much clearer than just looking into a trench.
And you managed to map all this, that you've got an idea of what the priory looked like?
We did. Archaeology is by its very nature destruction. So we have to map, record and photograph everything we do, especially when we're having to get to earlier layers, because we have to take the later layers off to see the earlier walls. We photograph, we draw, we digitally scan the images, we make field notes. What we aim to do, from the documentary evidence and our report, you could reconstruct the site once we're finished. That's all been recorded and it's all been written up at the minute.
Can you describe the layout of the site?
Yes, I can. What we had to start with, we found very, very few remains of the priory. In fact, and it's quite ironic really, the only piece of datable evidence we found was one shard of 12th century glass. But this was identified as being 12th century, very high status, and could only have come from an ecclesiastical building. On top of that, we had a later manor house, which we knew about, and that particular manor house, the people who used to live there, the Custs and the Paynes, went on to marry into the Brownlows, and they had Belton House built.
So very influential family.
Very much so. At one point, when we were looking through the documentary evidence, Lady Elizabeth Cust, she was going to move into Belton House, but her family thought that Belton House wasn't grand enough for her.
Well, that suggests that this is grander than Belton
Yes,
House.
certainly. When we looked at the stonework, what was left in the ground, this was really high status stonework, and it was too high status to be from a priory. So we think what probably happened if there was anything left of the priory, the stonework was reused in the making of High Hall, which is what we believe to be the house which stood in the site.
So the actual house that they owned, the manor house, vandalised what you possibly could have found of the priory?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, but what we did find, a lot of the later walls were built on the foundations of earlier walls. So they weren't daft, they weren't going to create work for themselves. If there was a wall already there, in roughly the right alignment, they used that to build the later house off. And certainly after the manor house was there, we have again documentary evidence to say it was squatted in for a while, and it disappeared about 1850.
David, what equipment do you use to actually survey the site?
Well, the basic surveying is done with good old-fashioned tape and measure. We can measure the raise and fall of the ground using basically a plumb bob, but we also use geophysical techniques. There's two systems we use. The first one is called earth resistance surveying. It's like a resistance meter electricians use. We put two probes into the ground and introduce an electrical current. We can then measure the electrical current in the ground with a meter we use. Occasionally you might have seen them on sites. It looks like a big frame with two big metal spikes sticking out the bottom of it. The electrical current passes through the ground, and where that electrical current meets a wall, the electrical current can't pass through the wall, so it has to go around it. By going around it, that introduces a high resistance to the flow of the current, and equally, where we've got maybe a pit or a ditch, or maybe an old watercourse, the electrical current can pass quicker through those features. We then map that, and from what we see in the variations in the earth resistance, it tells us where there's things like stone walls, pits, ditches, wells. It's a very, very useful technique. The other technique we use is magnetometry. This measures variations in the magnetic field on a site. Most things will affect the magnetic field of a site, especially areas of burning, because what will happen in an area of burning, the temperature, once it reaches 700 degrees, it resets the magnetic field. And other things like ferrous objects such as nails, general areas of anthropogenic activity, all introduce waste in the ground. Most of this waste can be magnetically enhanced, which is what we can detect.
How much of a wall do you need to change that reading?
Not much at all. 2 courses of stonework, right down to anything about 1/2 metre wide, we can detect at about 2 metres deep, right up to big proper masonry walls. Anything that will put up a resistance to the electrical current we can detect.
And what about these crop marks? I've been reading about crop marks.
Crop marks are interesting. Maybe if you get a dry summer and you've got some buried walls just under the surface of a field, once the crop is planted, the roots of the crop go down to get the moisture from the ground. If those roots hit a wall, they can't get the moisture from the ground, so they die off. And when viewed from the air, what you can see is a nice field full of ripened crop with small lines in it over the walls where the crop's died off. And that's how we see crop marks in the fields. And that's often a good indication that there's walls in there.
Nothing to do with crop circles?
Nothing to do with crop circles at all. Crop circles are man-made. They're not aliens. Don't believe Von Daniken.
I won't believe that at all then. What other artefacts did you find?
As excavations go, we've had a lot of artefacts from Hough. As I said earlier, the earliest one we had was a piece of sort of 11th, 12th century window glass. We've gone right through to early 20th century artefacts, but the majority seem to be from the 15th to the 17th century, mainly bits of pottery. We've had some nice metal finds, pieces of jewellery, quite a few local trading tokens, quite a few from Ancaster, where these were used instead of cash. They would be used to pay workers on the site, workers on the estate. They could then go and exchange those for things like bread, beer, that sort of thing. And also a lot of clay pipes, good quality, datable clay pipes from about the 16th through to the 18th century. We've had that many, in fact, that the collection of clay pipes has been sent away for a specialist report, because as an assemblage they're unique in this country.
Is this going to be a tourist site?
Well, the site itself is under private ownership, but there is a public footpath that runs across the site, and if you go and have a look, there's an interpretation board being put up on the site which explains a bit about the archaeology. There's some of our maps are on there, there's some photographs of some of the artefacts, and there's also some information about the general area, the wildlife and the environs in the area. So that, from an archaeological point of view, that was a nice result, to be able to go up there, see these earthworks, but then have a look at the interpretation board so you can tie everything in. It just explains a bit more about what's going on the site.
And where is that board in relation to, say, the church?
Well, that access to the site is from Colton Road. There's a small path running between two houses, and then the footpath goes across the southern side of the site. Just as you go into the field through the public footpath gate, it's just on the right hand side. So it is there to be seen. It's right next to the footpath.
Now, why do you think there were so many clay pipes there?
Well, the date of the clay pipes is quite tight. There's about a 50 to 100 year window on the date of these clay pipes, and they all date with the demolition and the removal of the manor house. We'd like to think that some of these clay pipes came from the people who pulled the buildings down. When we excavated one of the walls, we found a whole series of clay pipes all snapped off and just thrown over this wall. And you can imagine all these old boys pulling this building down, having a break, smoking a few clay pipes and just dropping them over the wall, a bit like fag ends. It was fascinating. We were just digging away, and we had this huge deposit of clay pipes all piled up on each other. Very interesting.
So that's the very earliest example of a staff room.
Basically, yes. This was where they were knocking off early, hoping the foreman wouldn't find them. But the location as well, it was in one corner of the site. It was along the northern boundary. It was nice and sunny, but as the sun came round later on in the day, it fell in the shade, and you could look across to the church, and you can just imagine them just sitting there, hiding from the foreman.
I'm fascinated with that little bit about trading tokens.
Mm-hmm.
I've not come across those before.
Oh, very interesting. The ones we found a lot at Hough, which were from Ancaster, and we have done a bit of research on the name on the trading tokens, but that information's yet to come back for us. But it seemed to be the Lord of the Manor was paying his employees or giving them these trading tokens in return for their work. The employees, the people working on the land, could then go to certain stores, in this case particularly one in Ancaster, and instead of handling cash, they would hand over these trading tokens in return for maybe small beer, meat, fish, that sort of thing, maybe clothing. And it was sort of pre-money, but by having the tokens, there was obviously a bit of a conspiracy going on, because they could only use them at certain stores.
And small beer, I've come across this term before. That is just watered down beer,
Yes,
is it?
yeah, it's very weak beer. You could drink gallons and gallons of it, because...
It's safer to drink than the water?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as you know, in that time, the water wasn't safe to drink, and the only way to purify it was ferment it, turn it into alcohol. But if it was 5 or 6% and your employees were drinking 7 or 8 pints a day, they wouldn't be able to do any work. So
No wonder they were avoiding the foreman.
Oh yes, that's why they're hiding. So not only were they hiding behind this wall with all these clay pipes, we haven't found any drinking vessels yet, but I bet they're there. But if it's small beer, small as in volume, maybe 1-2%, it would just taste like cheap watered down beer, but it kept the sugar levels up, it kept the water levels up.
So this was a very busy site, was it?
Yes, once we started in about 1995, we had a core team of about half a dozen people. As the popularity of the group grew and programmes like Time Team started on telly, we had an influx of up to 40 people. And I think around 2002, one particular weekend, we had over 40 people excavating on the site. Now, we're not paying them. They were there by their own free will. They weren't press-ganged into coming to dig for us. They wanted to be there. And it was voluntary work, and it was nice to see so many people, including some locals as well, just coming over, joining the group, asking us, can we have a go? We were offering that facility to have a go at doing archaeology, and at least then, if they didn't like it, they could go away and say, well, I've had a go. And archaeology is seen as a bit of a black art. Not many people get to have a go at it, but it's good fun. You can't do an awful lot of harm unless you go through a gas pipe with a digger, which is why we have to be insured. But fortunately, we've never done anything like that. But yeah, it's a great way. It's a good community spirit. It's nice to get the locals involved, and we like that community element. I mean, as a group, we like going into villages and working with people in back gardens and just showing them the history of their village and the history of their own back garden.
What did you add to the known history of Hough on the Hill?
The history was pretty clear up until about the medieval period. So what we added to that was the floor plan of High Hall, its later use, so it made the humps and bumps a bit clearer. It showed that the priory was more important than we thought it was. It lasted longer than we thought it did, but ultimately it just showed that, like a lot of things even nowadays, the money wasn't there to run it and it just fell into disuse. So I think from an archaeological point of view it was very interesting. From a historical point of view it was very interesting. It all adds to what we understand about the site.
So how easy is it to get access to do something like this?
I joined this excavation about halfway through. This particular site was owned by the Lord family, and Richard, John and particularly Henry were very, very trusting of us. Without their support and help, we wouldn't have been able to have got to dig this site at all. And to have landowners like that who are interested enough to allow us to come and dig holes, it doesn't get any better than that, because without their permission you can't do anything. So I'd like to say a big thank you to the Lords for allowing us what was, I think, 9 years.
9 years?
9 years. And we're still writing the project up now.
That's actually finished now?
Yes, that finished around, I think it was about 2003 or 2004.
So why did that stop?
There was new rulings came in from Europe about disturbing permanent pasture. We can still dig if we wanted to, but there's a lot of paperwork we have to fill out. We have to apply for a derogation from Natural England. This allows permission for the landowners to allow excavations on the site. And it's just a way of controlling the landscape a bit more and protecting the archaeology that's already there.
And you'd have to have a very good reason to do that.
We'd have to have a very good reason, especially to dig through permanent pasture.
So do you think you've had everything that site can offer you?
Over the 9 years we got about 95% of the information I think we needed. It was a shame because we were only about 1 year off finishing the site when we had to leave anyway. So we came away from the site feeling a bit disappointed that we didn't get to finish the excavation properly. Nobody else will get to look at that site, so what we learned and what we've recorded, it's great. It may change hands, it'll just disappear into the mists of time. Back in the mists of time.
Back in the mists of time.
Yes.
Oh, it is. Very yes. Lord of the Rings, this.
Oh, yes.
Are there lots of villages around Lincolnshire where this sort of thing, you think you could find something?
Yes, Lincolnshire, well, the Midlands in general, Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, this area, it's full of DMVs, which are disused medieval villages, or SMVs, which are shrunken medieval villages. The Midlands have got the highest count of these missing or lost villages from anywhere in the country. Most villages around here have a missing church or a missing priory, and you can see these in the landscape if you go looking into fields, over hedges, and start looking for example, rectangular depressions in fields. They're normally fish ponds or water management. There's quite a few areas around here that have strange lumps and bumps in fields, maybe a platform, and normally you'd have a building on a platform, but once you know what to look for, they're everywhere. We're littered with them.
Have you got another dig going on at the moment?
We're hoping to go back to Ancaster. We've got nothing on at the minute, but we are working on a site just north of Ancaster, near North Orsby. But Grantham Archaeology Group are going to be involved in a big project just over the border at Newark in the summer, looking at the Civil War remains. I know it's a bit out of the area, but Newark's got some of the best preserved Civil War remains in the country.
So what do you hope to find?
We've got permission to go onto a site near Horton, And in the middle of this site was an old manor house. And all the finds run up to the middle of the English Civil War and then just stop. So we think that house was probably taken down during the Civil War because it even fallen out with the wrong side, or it was in the way of cannon fire. And it's half of it's archaeological and the other half is academic. It's to promote and make people more aware of the Civil War remains, because they've got 3 classic types of Civil War in Newark, all 3 types of siege. Got the first type of siege, which is go in, shout, throw a few bricks, scaremonger a bit. The second type of siege, sort of maybe go for a week, get a few cannon up on the hilltops, shout obscenities to each other, attack the town, tell them the king's wrong, and go. Then you've got the third type, which was a proper over the winter type. Let's knuckle in, lads, we're going to pull Newark down. And there's nowhere else in the country that has got the examples of all 3 types of siege.
Newark was a royalist stronghold.
Yes. There was a lot. It's very complicated. It gets very difficult very quickly at Newark, because although it's not that well publicised, everything happened at Newark. All 3 types of siege. There was 3 or 4 different types of people fighting. There was hired mercenaries coming down. It was chaos, absolute chaos. And of course there, Charles I basically surrendered as well. So it's interesting. It was at Southwell. So it's going to be an interesting project.
Well, as I understand it, that's one of the reasons that Hough on the Hill was so important, because there was a good track from Hough through to Newark, which is one of the very few places you could cross the Trent.
Yes, and that particular track at one point took King John. And there's a little rumour that prior to King John dying, he was dined out on now I think it describes it as an unwise diet of ale and fruit. Basically what this report is saying, that the priors at Hough on the Hill might have poisoned him or gave him some dodgy fruit. So by the time he got to Newark, he wasn't feeling very well at all. Unfortunately, as you know, King John had some treasure, but he didn't leave it at Hough.
If anybody's listening and they're really interested to join, how do they get in touch with you?
The email address is granthamarchaeologygroup@yahoo.co.uk. Big one, all one word, but that will come straight through to me.
Now, a few minutes ago, I asked you what was the most valuable thing you'd found at the Hough site.
Well, I have to say, of all the excavations, the most valuable thing I found was my wife. We met on the site at Hough on the Hill, and quite shortly after we were married, weren't we, dear?
Yes, we were, and have been ever since.
Was it as romantic as it sounds?
Not really. I turned up on site on the first day, and I knew I got to meet this chap called Dave Hibbett, and I wandered across, and which one's Dave? And they said, that's him. And so I went and introduced myself, and he promptly led me to a trench right away from everybody else, put me in it, get on with it, and left me there.
It's not quite how it happened.
Yes, it is.
Okay, yeah, maybe it was.
And they all went for their lunch and left me at dinner time. I was there quite happily scraping away,
You were
hearing
happy?
the murmur. The murmur of happy voices. It suddenly went quiet, and I popped my head up, and there they all were, sat round having their lunch, and left me to
And then
it.
we all pointed at you and gone, oh, we forgot one. But you enjoyed it.
I loved it.
That first day, you thought you'd be not allowed to dig, not allowed to trowel. So, as I said earlier about letting people have a go, especially with Ange, it was, right, there's your excavation, here's your trowel, get on with it, you can't damage it, if you've got any questions, just stop and ask. And you were straight into a full-scale excavation.
Absolutely loved it. And he obviously fell for my glamour and my sophistication, with my scraped back hair, no makeup, dirty knees.
So what is it I've seen you?
I don't know, but it worked for us. It worked for us. They say sometimes opposites attract, but it certainly wasn't the case for us, was it?
No, I think we couldn't be. We couldn't, could we? We'd have to be interested in the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it just wouldn't work.
Yeah, never happier than when I'm in a trench with Dave.
That has got to be the most beautiful line I have ever heard.
Love at first sight, on first sight.
Love on first sight. And the rest is history.
So I'm here talking to Ken Gregory, and you've got a very particular claim to fame, haven't you, in regards to Hough?
Yes, I have. The only one that it is, I'm supposed to be the oldest resident in Hough on the Hill.
Well, I better not ask you how old you are, because that would be very rude.
Not at all. My age, it didn't matter. Yeah, 85.
And how long have you lived in Hough?
Since 1993.
You're a Grantham boy, really, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Bred and born in Inner Street, Grantham.
It's a beautiful village, but
Yeah.
how did you end up there?
Well, if you'd ever lived in Inner Street, you'd know why. If you see a cat in Inner Street with two eyes, it was a tourist. And the police used to walk about in twos.
Did they really?
Yes, they did.
These are...
No, it's quite true. Well, I was on the council list for a house for a great number of years. And when I retired in 1992, the council itself informed me that there was a residency going. I went to Carlton's Route first, but I was right outside the village hall, and I didn't like the music that was playing. So then I was offered this house in Hough on the Hill, and Liz and I both took it, and it's beautiful. I have good neighbours, I have a beautiful church there, and everything I want, really. Nice pub, they do a nice meal.
Well, what's this I hear about you spotting a leopard?
It was reported by a friend of mine, Bob Camp. He's dead now, unfortunately, and a bloke named Michael Jarman, and they'd seen it. And the Journal interviewed me and said that I'd seen it, and I said yes. I see Lord Lucan riding Shergar chasing it.
Was it a real sighting? I mean, there isn't really a leopard.
No, good Lord, no. It was, in actual fact, it was Rick Cornthorpe's cat. And it's black, honestly, and it's quite large, but that's what it was. And when you've had 2 or 3 rooms, you have a tendency, don't you?
You actually met an ostrich outside the pub?
Oh yeah, well I belong to my...
Have you had 2 or 3 rooms?
No, I hadn't, no, strangely enough. But no, we went up the village, Bob and I, and he went in to get his paper. We had a post office and a paper shop, and he went in for that. And right outside, because he reported seeing this leopard, was this ostrich, and it was about 6 foot tall, and he completely ignored it.
And the ostrich belonged to a friend of yours?
Molly Burkett, yes.
So do you have lots of societies and committees and things in Hough?
Well, they've got the Historic Society. I'm not a member of that. And there's one of those other 2 functions that go about with, walking round and this type of stuff, because it's very good, take people around the church. I used to clean the church.
Did you? How did that come about?
I was down on the village with a duster. But the vicar, he's lovely. Nobody that lives in Hough on the Hill, Brandon and Caythorpe now are allowed to be buried in the church anymore.
Why is that?
Well, you've got to be dead first.
Look, Ken, thank you very much for talking to me
It's
today.
my pleasure. Thank you.
So I'm sitting with Molly Burkett, and you came to Hough, about 47 years ago,
yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, end of the 1960s, yes.
Now, I've talked to 1 or 2 residents, and you run a wildlife rehabilitation centre.
Yes, it's on low key at the moment because of the state of the house, but yes, we do work on rehabilitation. My husband died, as you know, a few months ago, but I'm certainly not giving up the work, and I've got the Morrises over at South Kyme who are helping and taking a lot, and we will be moving some of the birds over to South Kyme.
Now, what got you started in this?
Being evacuated from a town into a little village called the Netherseal. Well, it was just magic.
You really liked it?
Well, I was woken up by the birds singing in the hedges each morning. From somebody who'd had a nanny and all the old-fashioned type of bringing up that you used to have in those sort of houses in those days, I was suddenly a free spirit. And the day we arrived, the first full day, somebody had come round and said if anybody wanted to go for a nature walk on a Saturday, they were to be at the side of the river at, I think it was 8 o'clock in the morning. So I went home and told my foster mother I had to be at that spot at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I think I got there about 7:30 and waited. I suppose I was 7, might have been 8. And he took us along the river, and he was pointing out all sorts of things, which to me were just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And we went into the wood, and there was a clearing there. And there were only 6 of us there that he was taking. I was the only evacuee. And he said, stand still. Now what can you see? Well, we couldn't see anything really, a lot of dead leaves and stuff on the floor. Now look again. Train your eyes to look. Take one step forward, he said. And I took one step forward, and this bird flew up. And it was a nesting nightjar. And he let me go forward and look at these 4 eggs. That's the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen in my life. But that was it.
You were hooked.
I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I was also absolutely fascinated on the rabbits in the field. It was just wonderful, really.
What was the first animal that you looked after?
Don't forget, we started when we lived in Hampshire. Well, no, we started before we actually got married. Mainly with blackbirds and these sort of birds, which were coming in to be hand-reared. And, you know, we hadn't realised then how very, very much was involved. It's not only a case of rearing something, it's a case of keeping its wild instincts alive. And not letting them get used to people. Letting them get used to human situations at all. And handling them as little as you can. As I say, to start with, we'd had little songbirds coming in, which we'd reared, and we'd got away. The first one was a blackbird which kept coming into the house. You know, we realised, hang on, this isn't right. And so I started keeping notes of bird behaviour. Mainly birds. I mean, we take animals as well, but mainly birds. And now it will be only birds, because I haven't got the land to put our animals in. Although you're always tempted if you get a young badger coming in, because that's my expertise. Well, there's just been no stopping, really. The first thing that happened, I think, after we were married, was the Dutch people asking us to go and help there. We went over to Holland. And as soon as we were in Holland, it was an incredible time, really. I mean, we hadn't been going very long, but I think it was a sort of a new branch, and we met all these different people. We met Rance Voller, who was Goering's falconer in the war, and he actually came up. My husband was much more impressed in the car he had, because it was Goering's car. He came in, sort of sports car, where it's open at the top anyway. And he was the first person to ever breed wild birds in captivity. He bred the first peregrines. And, we were questioning him on this, and he said he'd just put the 2 of them in a chicken house, and they bred, and he released the young. And, and this is so, we knew these things could be done. From then on, it just escalated.
When did you get your first badger?
From badger diggers, I think.
I don't know what a badger digger is.
They still do it, I think. Then it's illegal, but it still carries on, I'm sorry to say. But they get these young badgers and rear them, and then let the dogs go at them to train their dogs. It is horrible. Somebody rescued one of these young badgers, which they'd got out and brought to us. I wrote the book about Nicky. In fact, I was giving a talk in a little school, Buckminster School. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe it, because as soon as they knew I was there, several of the parents came up and brought that old book, which was done about 30 years ago, on Nicky. And they said it was a book they'd never been parted from. So I've taken it home and read it myself, and I thought, hang on, this needs rewriting. I sold the film rights of that book, actually. So it was the only money I've ever really made about anything. And I used all that money straight away, put it right down, started Barney Books to encourage other people to write their experiences and this sort of thing.
How many books have you written?
I don't know. I've written all my life. It's a disease with me, really, writing. Now I just do little paperbacks. This one I've just done on the badger again, because we've had countless numbers of badgers since then. And now the way we treat them is quite differently. As soon as they're off milk, they go straight into the release pens. Some of them are down in Wales, and they're all put up properly, and they're all released properly, and and they don't see humans at all. But Nicky was our first one, and I'm afraid
he stole your heart.
Well, he was like a dog. I went to take my driving test, in Winchester. We were in Hampshire then, and I forgot Nicky was in the car. And suddenly all hell was let loose, because she was asleep on the back seat, and she suddenly sit on the examiner's lap in front.
She was not being expected.
I didn't pass the test that time. I had to take it again. But no, she was a little smasher. But they always are. Badgers are lovely, But I'd much rather see them wild. But you see, just a few weeks ago now, there was a lady phoned up. They'd gone for a walk south of Stamford somewhere. and they'd come across a badger that was sick on the ground. And I said, can you check it and see if it's all right? Will it bite? So I said, yes, but be very sensible, and told them what to do. But it was virtually unconscious anyway, but it was still breathing. Shall we get the vet? So I said, no, don't get a vet, they'll destroy it. But I said, you can phone up and ask the vet if they would treat it. But they told her no, they would just put it to sleep, stop any suffering, because it was a wild animal and didn't want to handle it. I said, no, never move a badger away from the set. Never move a badger away from, they're so regular in their behaviour, treat it where it is. They followed everything I told them to do while it was still unconscious. They found out it had got a noose around its neck, it had gone into a trap. So that's why I say I think there could very well be some of this going on in the area.
Did they manage to save it?
Oh yeah. I told her what to do. I said, can you go and get some wire cutters, just cut that off. But leave that animal where it is, because it will come round. They're very, very tough animals, the badgers. I brought it back her coat, she did. They went back in the evening and she said, oh, it's all right, she said, it's gone back down the badger set. We followed through the track and it's gone down the hole and it's just as you said and all the rest of it. So I said, well, how do you know so many details? Oh, she said, well, I can see the bit of my coat at the end of it because I didn't like it lying on the ground, so I laid it on my coat and it's disappeared down the hole with my coat. And I could just see my coat. So, I think that one's going to be all right, that one. There's nice endings to those stories.
It's a lovely story. How did you end up in Hough? When did you first come here?
John had his job transferred to Melton Mowbray. We first of all tried to get a house within 10 miles of Melton Mowbray. We were actually looking for the last house in a village so that we wouldn't annoy any neighbours. I mean, they're not a nuisance, the birds we have in, but owls, for example, do hoot sometimes in the middle of the night. And I know people moving in now don't even like being woken up by sheep, do they? So, and when we slowly got out till we got into the 50-mile radius, and John phoned up and said, well, I found this, and that was it. We didn't know then it was the estate village. But of course I'm very interested in the history as well, and fortunately the Duke was very interested in birds. He kept cage birds, so we got on very well. But as soon as I got here, the other side of my nature comes up with my pen, because, you see, it was an estate village. All of these people were estate workers. Now, in the rest of the country, in many ways it was medieval. But in the rest of the country, it wasn't. And I started recording quite a lot of these stories. I've got sacks of papers. Absolutely incredible. And I've just printed the third Once Upon a Lifetime of local stories there. And I've even got a story there of the man who saw the first car going down the A1. Whether it was the first car, I don't know, but it was the first car that they'd seen locally. And he was 8 and he'd lived on a farm. And the one thing that did interest me, though, particularly about Hough, was the Romanes. There was a lot of association with the Romanes with the church. Found it very difficult to find any facts on this. But I found a lot of what I wanted in Long Bennington, because there were 4 Romany burials, and the service was at Hough, but they were not buried in the Hough church. I couldn't make this out. It turned out they were actually buried in Derbyshire, in Derby City. There was a place where the Romanists did take their special people. But Lovedon Hill was a special place for the Romanists.
I wonder why.
I don't know. And then they kept on coming in with the blonde gypsy. Now, I researched that, and again I found the details of that as far as I could get them in Long Bennington. Absolutely fascinating story. He wasn't a born Romany. He was one the Romany Queen took under her wing. And looking through those old records, it's amazing, really. And this area is an amazing area for all of these legends. But then when you search into it, there's some factual things. I've still got to write them up as stories. I've done a rough write-up on the blonde gypsy, because that is an absolute fascinating story.
I don't know how you've had time to do all this. So you've been looking after the animals, and obviously you release them into the wild.
That takes a long time, but they go back to where they've been found. I mean, we've been up in Scotland releasing this summer.
You take care here of animals that are found in Scotland?
Well, not so much now, because we've just got a unit set up in Scotland itself, but we're still working together with them. They actually work for the Forestry Commission, yes, and we do work with them.
So then your writing runs parallel to all this work. There seems to be three main strands for the writing. There's the wildlife,
Yeah,
local history,
yeah, and children's.
and now World War One.
Yeah, well, you see, a lot of the stories I've got, a lot round here actually, could still remember World War One. In actual fact, I'm doing a most delightful thing at the moment, and that is William Robertson, and I'm doing it with the village of Wellbourne. The hairdresser started it, what they call a crop shop in Wellbourne. Yeah, you're always working with schools, why won't you work with us? So I said, all right, I will. They've got a man who becomes world famous, the only man to ever become a field marshal from being a private. Ever. We do an awful lot of schoolwork.
What sort of things do you do in the schools?
Well, I started off by trying to get the kids to understand their own wildlife, but now it's really what they want to do. So I'll go and get you some of my school books.
There are literally hundreds of books here. Once Upon a Lifetime
That's
3
the third one I've done.
by Molly Burkitt.
They're local stories, they are. That's the first one I did. I did that one with my grandson. And the hobby, by the way, is a rare hawk, and it was just down over there, it was nesting.
So this one's called The Hobby.
Yeah, Sev has just been selected for the English football team. Oh, I did that as a school book. That's up at Cranwell School.
A Flight Through Time, The Airships of RAF Cranwell.
Oh yeah, well, I've got another one there.
And the children help you, do they?
Yeah, they do. They do very well. They put their little poems in, they put their writing in, and then I meet all their writing up, do you see?
And this one's called A Swan Called Diamond.
Yeah, that's down at the Swannery. None of the children had ever been there to that Swannery, and it's absolutely marvellous at Welney. That I did 50 years looking after the ravens at the tower. Yeah.
50 years?
50 years I did.
At the Tower of London?
Yeah.
What did you have to do for that?
I trained the ravens so they didn't attack the public.
You're very casual about all these marvellous achievements.
Well, no, it's just something that, you had to do, I think.
Well, I didn't know that people had to do that.
Well, they don't now because they get them young. Oh, that was Rutland Water, the osprey. The kids took them down to Rutland Water and they saw an osprey go in. That's what we had to write about. Yeah, we've got the whole series of this, of famous people of East Midlands, Lincolnshire, by John Hayden. He's one of our writers.
When you say one of our writers, this is through Barney Books?
Barney Books, we've got a team of about 8 writers that go into schools.
And this is your firm, is it?
I started it with the money I got from selling the film rights of The Year of the Badger. I immediately put the money down and started Barney Books to encourage other new writers. What had happened was that a lady had given me a book she'd written and to see if I could do anything with it. And it was quite good. It was on Egypt, children in Egypt in the old days. And I sent it to my publisher and asked them if they'd look at it. And would they not say anything to me but communicate with her? And I didn't think anything else of it, you see. And then about 2 years later, she came to a talk I was giving. She stayed behind afterwards, and she just very quietly gave me a copy of the book. So I said, oh, good, you got it done in the end. No, she said, look who's written it. And somebody else said it was somebody else's name on it. And it was definitely her book. And I thought, I'm never going to let this happen again. I was very friendly with a lady called Miriam Rothschild. And I went down to her and I said, look, I'm not going to have this happen again, what can we do? And she helped me set up a business. She set the business up for me and it became Barney Books. And we're still going on, and I'm off to Australia and we're going to try and do a buddy book.
What is a buddy book?
A buddy book is meeting a class of children in Australia with a class of children in England, doubling up, working together, using the computers and everything.
Just got to ask you this. Did they make the film? You keep saying you sold the film rights.
Yes, animated.
It's an animated film, and what's it called? The Year of the Badger?
Year of Nicky, I think.
Oh, they called it Nicky?
Yeah. just as it was going through, Walt Disney, he died about this time. I think it was filmed in Japan rather than America. I know I was a bit disappointed with it. I haven't kept a copy of it because they put John going to work in an aeroplane. I thought that was a bit over the top. They knew what they could sell. I mean, I know what I can sell with books. And
well, I don't think I've ever met an author that's had a book turned into a film. I'm quite impressed, you know.
Oh, yeah? Well, I was quite impressed with the cheque. But you do meet a lot of people. A lot of really nice people. And I got the MBE for birds, not for the books.
When did you get an MBE?
About 3 years ago. We'd become the oldest in the world by then to run any centre.
So you went up to the palace for that?
Yes. Yes.
And how does that tie in with you doing the work with the ravens at the Tower of London?
Oh, no connection at all, really. To be honest, towards the end, they decided they wanted to breed ravens. They wanted to breed their own ravens rather than take from the wild. And so we were going up there guiding them how to do it. I was actually in London Zoo. We used to get quite a lot from London Zoo. And they'd been talking to somebody. And as I was coming there, oh, well, there's the person you want. Look, she's just coming down there. She said, she's the expert on sex. That's what they wanted to do. The ravens were fighting. They wanted to know if it was because of it was sexual behaviour or other behaviour. Anyway, I went back with them to the tower, and I got on ever so well with them. I've still got one raven down there that I brought back from the tower because it was getting too old to leave down there. That was 32 years ago, and it was showing signs of age.
I can't believe you just dropped your MBE into the conversation, because I didn't know you got one of those.
I felt quite touched with the village. They did pull the stops out, a lovely arrangement of flowers in a stand.
They must have been very proud.
Yeah, I thought that was very nice of them.
What I really want from you is a couple of funny anecdotes. So, you know, things like the Rhea story. That was quite funny, the way it was told to me up at the pub.
Oh, it was funny, but they were feeding it on potato crisps. We had to go and get it out off the A1. It was walking down the middle of the A1.
Where did it come from in the first?
We never did find out. They can sort of they can travel quite a long way. Rheas, like ostriches, if they get out. You've got to be very careful how you get hold of them, because they've got a backward-facing claw. And when you get them, they tend to bring up their legs like that, and the claw can get you in your tummy. So I wouldn't advise anybody to go and try and catch a rhea, and certainly not an ostrich, because they're the same, unless they know what they're doing. What we generally do is I go up behind and more or less sit on it, and then John came and got his legs together, and then we picked it up between us.
That's all fine, but how did you come to know what you were doing? I mean, you can't get a lot of practice with ostriches and rheas.
Well, you do, you see. You've been going for many, many years. And don't forget, I've been going to countries all through the world, really, advising, because for a long, long time, John and I were the only ones with any experience. And you see, that first visit we made to Holland was absolutely incredible, because all these people were coming to see us, and we'd only just started. Bill Mattox came. He was in the Canadian Army. You see, they were still in the Army over there, and the Americans came. Corny McFadden, he was a character and a half. But they were all interested in birds and things, but hadn't taken it as seriously as John and I had done. Because in the war, John had spent time on a farm down in Somerset, and he'd gone for country life, and I mean, that's all he ever really wanted to do. He wanted to be a farmer, but he couldn't get in because of the prisoners of war working on the farms. They weren't taking students, you see. I was fascinated with it. People keep saying to me, oh, John and his birds. But what they didn't realise, it was me and my birds first. But John was a very big falconer. Funnily enough, I went back to Holland, not all that long ago, a bit back, because they're watching the same nest. Would you believe? The same nest in the same tree that we'd got, they reckoned it was anyway, that we'd gone all those years before. But they'd got it all on screen, all computerised, everything. It was quite different to us. We'd got a rope ladder and, got a hoist up. You see, we're the only people doing this at the time. And it was one of the reasons that we moved to Grantham, because a lot of birds, more birds than animals, we got snakes coming in, but mostly birds, were coming down and landing in London and landing there late at night. we would be sitting on the station waiting for a bird to come in, and if it wasn't on the last train, John would have to get on his car, get up to London and chase the van round to see if they'd got these birds on, because we couldn't leave them in a lorry or anything. And so we thought if we came to Grantham, that was halfway down, it would stop, it would make life easier to us. We could get the birds off at Grantham Station. But it wasn't long after that the Forestry Commission realised what we were doing. I got ever so friendly with Reg Jennifer, then, who did all the sound recordings, and I used to go out with him doing deer recordings and things. Then we went back, we then went up to Tyne Drum, and we called on the farmer there, where we had taken the young peregrines from the eyrie because the hen had been injured. It was our first experience of having to climb a mountain, and John wasn't very good at heights, but we'd got two very experienced mountaineers, and one of them was the mountaineer that started the Mountain Rescue Service, and he was the mountaineer that was guiding us up the mountainside to get these. But the farmer took me out just on my own, out up the glen, and pointed out the eyrie, and he said, "They still nest there each year, and this year 5 young flew." We had rescued that hen, corrected a broken wing and got it back. So, I felt quite proud, actually. Yeah, I think one of the things was that the Belgians are big cage bird people, and they used to kill the birds of prey coming in. So John saw them, went over, John said, "Look, if I pay you, rather than kill them, mainly merlins, would you please put them in a box and send them across to me rather than kill them?" And I remember on this occasion there were 8 merlins that came in, and we just let the boxes out and used to fly them around, and they'd come back. It's almost as if they were tame. He was doing this one day, and 3 or 4 days, and then they'd start to get wild and disperse, and we think they probably went back to Belgium. We did wonder sometimes if we were having the same birds back, but we generally put a spot of dye under their tail so we knew if they were coming back. And one day, there were these 6 nuns standing at the gate looking at him, and he suddenly saw them. I thought, oh, I better get them down, because as they saw him looking at them, they all waved and came up to him and all things. And I think they really thought he was St. Francis. He was so embarrassed that I went out to see what was going on. You've got to get them to understand, Molly, you've got to get... And anyway, they invited him up to the convent, but he wouldn't go. I think the thing that surprises me most, really, is the absolute adoration of predators amongst people. You hear far more about, like the television programmes, it's nearly always about predators. There's predators coming in. And yet, I often think it's the little songbirds that need the protection. And I was down at Downtown with John, it was before he died, and we went out, and it was late dusk, and we just stopped on the step there because the whole of the car park had 5 barn owls quartering the car park, and they're beautiful in flight, of barn owls, so soft, they look so gentle, they're not, but they were just quartering the car park, and it was a fantastic sight in that light.
Now, just to finish, these books, Once Upon a Lifetime,
Yes.
They are local memories.
I was working with the community care for the elderly. They were bringing the groups of old people in, and I was just talking to them and getting their stories. There were some funny stories there.
Have you got a favourite you can share with us?
Well, one that did amuse me was a lady who'd been brought up in the Midlands. She was a child in the war. At the end of the war, men who had to go into the army, a lot of them were being put into the mines instead because fuel was short. And they were miners, and they had one of these men billeted on them, and he was from a public school. Well, they didn't have a bathroom, and come Friday night, they get the old tin bath in, didn't they, and filled it up with water, and they took all her clothes off to put her in the bath and wash her, and this chap looked a bit uncomfortable, you see. And then she said it was a bit hot, and Mum started taking her cardigan off, and he said, well, he thought he'd just go for a walk. And he said, my father put his hand out and said, oh, do not bother, lad, do not bother. He said, they winna splash you, which I thought was lovely. and now, because, that was life in those days, wasn't it? No bathrooms. They weren't in Hough. When we moved in, They didn't even have running water in the cottages.
Amazing set of memories. Molly Burkitt, MBE, published author, and so much more. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Oh, it's very nice to meet you.
The local history feature is brought to you by Gravity FM in association with Your Heritage, awarding funds from the National Lottery. See www.hlf.org.uk.